The internet told us that buying a house in Sweden can take months, sometimes years. You need a personal number, bank ID, lots of paperwork. And even if you win the auction, it still doesn't necessarily mean that the house will actually be sold to you. And yet, we eventually bought a house. But the journey to get it was completely different from what we expected. We drove several thousand kilometers to attend the viewings, and more than once we arrived at a place only to discover that the house had been already sold. We also met people who had been looking for property in Sweden for more than a year, and just when we were starting to feel like this was going to be a long and exhausting process, we found a house that we hadn't even known existed 24 hours earlier. That day we saw it for the first time, and few hours later we signed a purchase contract. And that's exactly the story I want to tell you today. Before leaving for Sweden, we started searching how buying property in this country actually works. Fairly quickly we came across several things that are quite important for the whole process. First, you need to have a place to live so that you can receive mail. After that, you can apply for Swedish personal number. With that, you can apply for a Swedish ID card. And with that, you can apply for a bank account and bank ID, which is a digital identity used on almost all official platforms. The problem is that obtaining these things can take quite long. One of the reasons these things are important is the way properties are sold in Sweden. In most cases, they are sold through an auction-style process. Interested buyers are placing bids and the price is gradually increasing. But what's interesting is that even if you win the auction, it still doesn't guarantee that the house will actually be sold to you. The seller always has the final say, and until the purchase contract is signed, nothing is certain. We looked for properties mainly on several large websites. Most often we used Hemmet, which is probably the biggest real estate portal in Sweden. Another website was Blocket. It's sort of a Swedish eBay. And occasionally we also checked Homestra. However, we stopped using Blocket because we discovered that the contacting sellers there often requires bank ID, and at that time we didn't have it yet. We still don't. It was also very important for us to set a maximum price we were willing to pay for a house. We decided that we would not spend more than half of our available savings. The reason was simple. We wanted to keep a sufficient reserve for repairs or renovation, which are almost always necessary with older houses. Before arriving, we also arranged a workaway. Thanks to that, we had a mailing address in Sweden. Once we arrived, we quickly developed our daily routine. Every day we checked new listings, saved interesting properties on a Google map, and tried to contact the sellers. Gradually, we created a list of places we wanted to visit. And let's be honest, on a map, when you can see it, it's quite handy, because once you actually travel somewhere, you can see if some of the properties are on your way. During the search, we discovered several things that surprised us. For example, in Sweden, the buyer is responsible for checking the condition of the property before purchasing it. There are specialized companies that inspect the entire house and create a detailed report. The cost of such an expansion depends on the size of the house and also on how many other buildings are located on a property. We also discovered that information about the whole process often varies a lot. Some people say that without a bank ID you can hardly arrange anything or actually purchase the house, while others don't consider it a problem at all. Another thing that surprised us was that not all properties are listed on the big portals. Whenever we saw a sign for sale, we stopped, find what real estate agency is listing the property, and check their website for more. We didn't have a specific location in mind. In general, the further north you go in Sweden, the cheaper the properties are. But the price wasn't our only condition. We mainly had an idea of what our future home should look like and what it should have. We wanted a place that would be more secluded and surrounded by nature. It was very important for us to have our own well, wood stove and septic tank. Ideally, we were looking for a house with a large piece of land, and if there happened to be a barn or another farm building on the property, that would be perfect. And maybe a bit unusually, we were also hoping that area would have a proper winter, because I really don't like warm weather. At that time, we were used to living in a van, which gave us enormous freedom of movement. We could easily travel between the viewings and stay in different places and parts of the country. Our first feelings after arriving in Sweden Sweden were a mixture of excitement and anticipation. At the same time, we were prepared for the possibility that finding our new home could take very long. Still, somewhere inside, I kept hoping that we might get lucky. The first property we went to see was one where the seller never even responded to us. We mainly just wanted to get an idea what a house in a Swedish forest actually looks like. The house was truly in the middle of the forest. There was moss everywhere and complete silence. At one moment we were lying on the mossy ground looking up at the sky when a deer suddenly emerged from the bushes just a few meters away from us. It was a beautiful first experience. The first official viewing was a bit more sobering. Even before the viewing we were told that we could of course come and look, but without a bank ID we wouldn't be able to buy the house anyway. The house was quite cheap and had a huge barn, but the barn was in terrible condition and the house required a lot of repairs and the septic system would also need a complete renovation. At another viewing we saw our first official inspection report for a house. It is something that the seller or buyer can request and pay for from a professional company. That house had its own drilled well for water, which sounded good, but in the small cellar there was a visible mold on the beams. By the cellar, I mean tiny room you had to climb down into using a ladder. With every viewing we started to get a better idea what we should be paying attention to. After several more viewings we found two properties that we really liked. Both were right on the edge of our budget, but they met most of the things we were looking for. They both had a large plots of land and several smaller buildings, which was very attractive to us. In Sweden, houses often sell quite quickly. One of the properties we really liked, people were already bidding on, while the other still had only the starting price. We tried to contact the real estate agent several times, but no one responded to us. Finally, we said to ourselves that we have nothing to lose and send our own offers. On one house we offered less than the starting price and on the other we bid slightly more than the previous bidder, and at that moment the agent finally responded. We were offered viewings of both houses on the same day. The problem was that we were about 800 kilometers away, so we decided to split journey into 2 days. On the first day we drove about 600 kilometers and spent the night in the beautiful place by the river, and the next day we planned to finish the journey and arrive for the viewings. We were full of excitement and imagining that we might actually be able to get our dream house. At the end of the first day a message arrived. The seller didn't accept our offer, so one of the properties was gone. And the next morning another message arrived. The price of the second one had meanwhile risen far above our budget. Both properties were suddenly gone within just a few hours. We quickly shook off the disappointment and prepared for the next opportunity. There was another property in the far north that had a viewing scheduled for the same day. We didn't hesitate. We contacted the agent and after another 600 kilometers of driving we arrived. The agent never showed up. We weren't the only ones who had come for the viewing. We found out that some people had been searching for more than a year and still hadn't found anything. So our very long journey ended that day with another disappointment. After the disappointment we decided to keep doing what we have been doing every day, checking new listings. We found one house that was relatively close and also on the way back. The agent offered us a viewing at 11 o'clock very next day. We thought that if nothing else we would at least gain another experience. We had no idea how important that decision would be. We inspected the house very thoroughly. I checked the cellar, attic and every single room twice. And the longer we stayed there, the more we liked it. Finally, the agent asked us, "Would you like to place a bid?" So we added 5,000 Swedish crowns. And then came a question we didn't expect at all. "If seller accepts your offer, would you be willing to sign the contract today?" We looked at each other and could hardly believe. The agent told us that the house was being sold by an elderly couple and that one of them had actually grown up in that house. He thought they might like who we were and what our plans were. He asked us to stay nearby until he received the answer. So we parked our van by a river and waited. At the same time we tried to keep our expectations very low so the disappointment wouldn't be too big. And then the message came and it stated we could sign it at 4 p.m. A house that we hadn't even known about the 24 hours earlier. A house we had seen for the first time just a few hours before. before was suddenly ours. That day, we signed a purchase contract. We could only move in almost 2 months later because the property had to be transferred in the land registry. Since I had never owned anything in Sweden before, the whole process took a bit longer. Those were probably the longest 2 months I experienced there, but at the same time, nothing compared to what we had mentally prepared ourselves for before leaving the Czech Republic. We knew our new home was already waiting for us. The entire internet prepared us for the idea that finding a house in Sweden could take months or even years, that it wouldn't be possible to buy one without going through a long bureaucratic process. Maybe we were just very lucky, but we also learned one thing. If you don't give up and keep going after what you want, sometimes things turn out completely different than you might expect it.